In this video, we're going to talk about Jupiter in the 5th house. So we're going to learn about, first of all, the 5th house, and then Jupiter, and then we'll talk about how to understand Jupiter in the 5th house. So we'll divide that in two sections: how to find the interpretive seeds and how to grow those seeds into full interpretations. Then we'll also look at the 5th house Jupiter in each zodiac sign, using famous people's charts. So first we'll do an overview of that, and then we'll get into details per the zodiac sign. So here are 12 famous people with Jupiter in the 5th house in various zodiac signs. Wes Craven in Aries, Pope John the 23rd in Taurus, Anton LaVey in Gemini, Umberto Boccioni in Cancer, Zucchero in Leo, Mia Farrow in Virgo, René Guénon in Libra, Steven Spielberg in Scorpio, Al Gore in Sagittarius, Walt Disney in Capricorn, Judy Blume in Aquarius, and Sigmund Freud in Pisces. Starting our discussion with the 5th house. It's the part of the sky that's below our feet, but a bit to the west. And so it signifies how our inner mind and feelings, etc., intelligence moves towards and interacts with other people. So this has a lot to do with ideas and intelligence, because intelligence is about the sharing and the comprehension of ideas. So since it's about sharing of ideas, it's also about communication. And since it's about communication, the 5th house is also about expression, and this is why it has a huge impact on creativity and art. It's not just about the sharing of ideas, but also about the sharing of feelings. So the 5th house has to do with our empathy, how we have sympathy and compassion and empathy with other people, and therefore it's the house of love and affection. And all of these things come down to the production of children. Now we can move on to talk about what Jupiter symbolizes. Basically, Jupiter is the planet that symbolizes positivity. Positivity can be summarized by a plus sign, and therefore Jupiter is the planet of increase. Since it's the planet of increase, it's the planet of creating things, bringing things into being. And since it's the planet of bringing things into being, it's the planet of parents, people who bring things into being and people who increase what they've brought into being. They grow the thing they brought into being. They raise children. So it has to do with parents and all people who play parental roles, like teachers, guides, priests, etc. Finally, Jupiter has to do with the wisdom, which is what the parent gives to the child to enable them to grow. So Jupiter has a lot to do with philosophy and religion. Another sense of positivity is like optimism, and optimism is essentially trust or faith in things. Because of this, Jupiter has to do with generosity and trustworthiness. So now we have the key traits of Jupiter and the key traits of the 5th house. We have those all clearly organized, and all we have to do to understand Jupiter in the 5th house is look for obvious connections between the two. For example, Jupiter has to do with children, and the 5th house has to do with children. So this is going to form the first seed of how we will interpret Jupiter in the 5th house. Jupiter has to do with wisdom, and the 5th house has to do with intelligence, so that forms the second seed. And also Jupiter has to do with increase, and the 5th house also has to do with productivity and increase. So those are the three seeds. To expand on these seeds is pretty simple and intuitive. Since Jupiter represents children and the 5th house represents children, Jupiter in the 5th house probably represents many children. Classic texts tend to say that people with Jupiter in the 5th house are worried about their children. And this can be misread by the modern mind, the modern reader, to mean something negative about children. But parenting correctly means being worried about your kids, and it means taking trouble for your kids. So, although there is one sense that maybe Jupiter in the 5th house causes troubles from kids, what it's really primarily saying is it makes you a parental type of person, a good parent, a parent that actually takes troubles for your children. For now, let's go on to the second C, that Jupiter has to do with wisdom and the 5th house has to do with intelligence. So therefore, people with Jupiter in the 5th house must be pretty smart. Specifically, they're smart in the role of an advisor or a teacher or a guide, somebody who tells us how to improve or sets some standard or gives us some information or helps us make sense out of things. The third seed of Jupiter in the 5th house is that both Jupiter and the 5th house have to do with increase in productivity. So probably Jupiter in the 5th house natives are productive, and that usually tends to mean they're healthy and wealthy. Let's test out this idea. Let's ask about the parenting history of these 12 people. Wes Craven has 2 kids with a pretty normal relationship as far as I know. Pope John the 23rd is celibate. No kids, yet he's the Pope. Pope means father. Anton LaVey had 3 kids. I think they hated him, at least one of them. So that's kind of interesting. Umberto Boccioni didn't really live very long, did have 1 child. Zucchero has 3 children, kind of normal relationships to them. Mia Farrow, 14 kids. 10 of them are adopted, and some very strange dramas going on with the kids. Renee Guénon, 4 kids. Steven Spielberg, 7. 2 of them adopted. Al Gore, 4 kids. Walt Disney, only 2, but obviously very obsessed with kids. Judy Blume, again, only 3. 1 is adopted, but obviously her whole life is revolving around children. She's the author of children's books. Sigmund Freud, 6 kids, and also quite obsessed with childhood and the process of making kids, aka sexuality. So yes, it does in fact look like Jupiter in the 5th house gives you a lot of kids. I think especially we find that when Jupiter is in a neuter sign or a dual sign, that it becomes particularly noteworthy. So the neuter signs are the signs that belong to Saturn or Mercury. So there would be Anton LaVey, Mia Farrow, Walt Disney, and Judy Blume. And the dual signs are Pisces, so Sigmund Freud. Sagittarius, Al Gore, maybe not. Virgo, Mia Farrow. And again, Anton LaVey. Now let's also take a quick overview of the concept that Jupiter in the 5th house indicates a person that's really intelligent. And not just an intelligent person, but a person who teaches other people and guides other people. Really, everybody on this list fits this bill, some more than others. I mean, obviously you have people like the Pope and Sigmund Freud, Renee Guénon, Judy Blume, very much obviously in a teacher role. Anton LaVey also, right? But then there's people, don't forget, like Walt Disney. The least really might be Wes Craven and Zucchero, and they're in these male malefic signs. So it really does seem to be quite a reliable interpretation of Jupiter in the 5th house to say these people become role models and teachers, and they're intelligent. Now, let's take a more detailed look at Jupiter in the 5th in each particular zodiac sign and each one of these famous people. Let's start with Aries. When Jupiter's in the 5th house in Aries, it is in the 1st lord and the 4th lord. So in addition to the basic traits that we associate with Jupiter in the 5th house, let's also highlight the fact that they're probably very confident and outgoing in how they express themselves, and it could be quite strong. And our example for this is Wes Craven. So he's a horror movie maker. it might not be so obvious why he's a horror movie maker unless you look at the nakshatra, and his ascending nakshatra is Mūla, which is a very favorable nakshatra for that genre. Now, if Jupiter is in Taurus in the 5th house, then it's the 12th and the 3rd lord. So this takes the baseline qualities of Jupiter in the 5th and it highlights ambitiousness and wealth, but in a very conflicting way. Because the 3rd and the 12th lord, one is ambitious, but the other is humble. The 3rd lord wants wealth, for example, and the 12th lord spends wealth. So these people are probably conflicted about their wealthiness. The 3rd seed of Jupiter in the 5th house probably takes some interesting twists or becomes a little convoluted when Jupiter is in Taurus in the 5th house. And our example for this is the Pope, John the 23rd. So here's a person who's ambitious in a humble religion and very, 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 very wealthy, but at the same time supposedly has no possessions type of thing. So I think that illustrates it quite well. In his case, we want to also note that his Jupiter in the 5th house, being his 12th lord, is also joined by Saturn, his 1st lord. And so the combination of the 1st lord and the 12th lord with mutual aspect to the 9th lord really clearly is drawing a picture of a very religious person. Above that, he also has the 8th lord sun in the 12th house, which is really depicting a spiritually motivated person. And finally, his 11th lord Mars is debilitated in the 7th house, which is not very easy for intersexual relationships. So in this whole context, it looks like a celibate religious person. Now, if we come to Jupiter in Gemini in the 5th house, then it must be the 11th and the 2nd lord. So this is more like okay with wealth, likes wealth, it wants to enjoy wealth. And our example for this is sort of like the opposite of the Pope, Anton LaVey, the satanic Pope. He really well exemplifies the idea of enjoying wealth, whereas the Pope is all conflicted about wealth because Satanism is really all about that. It's really about embracing and enjoying all the things that the church forbids. In particular, he's really into enjoying pleasures and wealth because his Venus is domiciled in the 4th house with Rāhu and the 8th lord. He's obviously a person who's going to have an occult flavor to this because his 1st lord is in the 12th house while his moon is in the 8th house. If Jupiter is in Cancer in the 5th house, then it's the 10th and the 1st lord. So in addition to all the things Jupiter in the 5th normally represents, this highlights the expressiveness in how Jupiter informs and teaches and guides. The example here is Umberto Boccioni, the artist who established like a new genre of art. Well, his 1st lord is in the 5th house, while his 5th lord, which is the moon, is in the 11th. And his 11th lord is in the 3rd, while his 3rd lord, which is Venus, is in the 10th. So this is a perfect signature of a professional artist. If Jupiter is in Leo in the 5th house, then it's the 9th and the 12th lord. So this makes a person expressive in a nice way, because they have the virtuous 9th and the humble 12th in the confident 5th sign Leo. Example here is Zucchero. His nickname is Sugar because he's so nice, right? He has a very, very good voice, as would be indicated by his 2nd lord being Venus in domicile while it's aspecting the ascendant. But his niceness and his shyness is really highlighted not just by his Jupiter in the 5th house in Leo, but by the fact that he has a debilitated sun with a lonely moon, with his 1st lord in the 6th house and his 10th and his 11th lord in the 8th house. If Jupiter is in Virgo, then it becomes the 8th and the 11th Lord. So now it really highlights the way that the person is going to be intelligent and information giving is going to be more talented and kind of sexy. But it's in Virgo, so the sexiness is kind of clean. Very good example of this is Mia Farrow. First Lord and her 9th Lords exchange their houses. So this makes multiple Raja Yogas, which is very, very indicative of a very famous person, and also of a person who's kind of philosophical or religious. Her 4th Lord and her 5th Lords join in the 10th house, which is another very big Raja Yoga, adding to that and really, really crystallizing the concept that this is a famous person. Her 1st Lord is trine to the 11th Lord, and her moon is in mutual aspect with its 11th Lord. So it's depicting a person who's quite talented and successful. If Jupiter is in Libra in the 5th house, then it's the 7th and the 10th Lord. So here Jupiter is very communicative or sophisticatedly expressive about how it shares its ideas and teaches others. And our example here is Rene Guénon, the philosopher. Really, his chart is very much being carried by his 1st Lord Mercury being in Sagittarius, alone in the Kendras, and aspecting the ascendant very strongly. If Jupiter is in Scorpio in the 5th house, then it's the 6th and the 9th Lord. So this intelligence now of Jupiter in this house is getting a bit of a challenging flavor to it, or like a problem-solving kind of nature to it. Steven Spielberg is the example of this. His situation as a movie maker and a talented storyteller is more discernible from the fact that his 9th and his 11th Lords have joined in the 5th house, with the 1st Lord as the moon. If Jupiter is in Sagittarius in the 5th house, then it's the 5th Lord and also the 8th Lord. So it's becoming really smart and critically smart, or having sort of subversive ideas. An example for this is Al Gore. Al Gore never won the presidency, but he's a very well-known vice president, and his basic platform is ecological reform, which is a very subversive idea in mainstream Washington. So he also has a 1st and 9th house exchange like Mia Farrow, which again is a big Raja Yoga and really can promote somebody and also makes a person philosophical or idealistic in their motivations. He also has an exalted 1st Lord, the Sun. He also has the 7th and the 9th Lords joining in the 1st house, making another Raja Yoga. Jupiter is in Capricorn in the 5th house. It's the Lord of the 4th and the 7th. So it's good at expressing things in a very concrete way, but it may become kind of brute, blunt about how it expresses things. Example for this is Walt Disney. And indeed, he is very, very opinionated and blunt. He was very concerned with telling children's stories, etc., etc. So why is this? Well, look at his chart carefully, and that Jupiter that is debilitated in his 5th house also has a lot of very good conditions. So in spite of it carrying in him the traits of a debilitated Jupiter in the 5th house, which is like that bluntness and that rudeness and that negativity and inflexibility, it also carries a lot of good things with it because, for example, Jupiter is the 4th Lord, but it's joined with Venus, the 9th Lord, which makes a Raja Yoga with the 9th house, the house of morality. Also, his Jupiter, the 4th Lord, joins with Saturn, who is the 5th Lord, which joins another Raja Yoga and increases the intellect, and also puts Jupiter in the company of a planet who is domicile, and so it aids or modifies Jupiter's debilitation. Furthermore, Jupiter is also sharing the 5th house with the 3rd Lord, who is exalted Mars. So to have the third lord exalted in the fifth house, while the fifth lord is domicile in the fifth house, is a very artistic indication. If Jupiter is in Aquarius in the fifth house, now it's the third lord and the sixth lord. So yes, it's still very intelligent and teachy, but it is now kind of taking an opposing view. It's expressing and it's sharing diverse viewpoints that are not always mainstream established, opposing viewpoints. It could be debative as well. So we have Judy Blume, a very amazing author of children's books that really discuss adult concepts, real meaningful concepts. In her case, her 11th lord joins her third lord in the fifth house with the first lord, Venus and Mercury. So obviously she's talented artistically. She can be a writer, but what is she expressing? What ideas is she expressing? Very liberal, counter establishment, not the same way that other people are trying to educate kids. If Jupiter is in Pisces in the fifth house, then it's the second lord and the fifth lord. So it really highlights the intellectual capacity of Jupiter in the fifth house. An example of this is Sigmund Freud. Why is he so proficient in psychology, and why does he have that particular sexual orientation towards the psychology? It's obvious from his chart that his first lord is in the 12th house with Ketu, while his moon is in the 8th house and his rising sign is the 8th sign, Scorpio. So having gone through all these 12 zodiac signs for Jupiter in the fifth house, I hope you have a clear idea not only of what Jupiter in the fifth house itself represents, but how it's modified by its conditions of what sign it's in, and also how that is modified by the conditions of the chart that it's in. If you want to understand the whole context of your chart, the soil in which your interpretive seeds grow, then visit my website, vicdecara.com, and click Readings. My complete chart report explains each and every nook and cranny of your chart and will keep you occupied in self-discovery for years. I also have 2 groundbreaking new reports. The first of these, your nakshatra, organizes your active nakshatras in order of their importance to you and presents the fundamental interpretations for the planets that occupy them. The newest report, Star Strength, uses a system called Tara to unfold 90 interpretations of the nuanced relationships between all the planets in your chart, which paints a rich and detailed picture of how your various strengths cooperate or compete with each other. Order these or any of my reports and accelerate your journey to deeper self-understanding.